Well, I mean, it is open until Tuesday, but you'll get deductions for lateness, and then it's closed on Wednesday because the answers are released. But you want to get the quiz done by tomorrow, please, if you haven't gotten it done. I'd appreciate that, and also you should appreciate it. It's good for you too. I have started grading some of the papers, so I'm moving my way slowly. I know I take a long time because I write too many comments, really. But anyways, hopefully it gives you some idea of how and why you got the grade that you did. All right, and I think that's it. I think that's all I need to mention. Nothing else. I'm going to start talking about the church. I know it says apostles and the church, but they're very much united, so I don't want to say they're exactly one and the same, but they're very much united, certainly. Certainly the apostles are members of the church. Yeah, it is. It should be on Canvas. So okay, thank you. Let me get my here. There we go. All right, the apostles and the church. Well, what's the church? Actually, why did I put that first? Hold on a second. Look at my own PowerPoints, Dr. Dunn. I think I gave you the definition before, earlier in the course, but I'll give it to you again. The church, there are two elements to the church. Faith in Christ, faith in Jesus, and faith in Jesus as the Christ, of course, the Messiah of the Jews, and as the Son of God. And then that faith leads to something, which is a practice. It leads to baptism. It leads to being dunked in water, which is a practice that came from Jesus. Maybe he took it from John the Baptist, but it was present within Jewish tradition at the time of Jesus, and still today. So we didn't reinvent the wheel on that. Yeah, these ideas, so that these things go together. Belief and practice should go together. Because if you don't practice what you preach, you are, in the words of Jesus, let's see here. Ms. Shatson, in the words of Jesus, if you don't practice what you preach, what are you? A hypocrite. Hypocrisy. That's our definition of hypocrisy. And of course, that's the unforgivable sin. You can't be a hypocrite. Well, no, it's not unforgivable. Jesus will still forgive it, but the ecclesia is the word that's used in Greek. The word church actually comes into English from a different source, but I'm giving you it doesn't come from ecclesia, but I'm giving you the common word in Greek that's used to describe this community in the Christian writings, and also, as we'll find out, in Jewish writings as well, for the community of Jews. The ecclesia, the assembly, ekkaleo in Greek. Ex means out of something. Ex, or ek. And then the verb kaleo, to call, basically almost exactly the same in English, which makes sense because we're cousin languages in the Indo-European language family. So to call out, okay, an assembly, to put it maybe into Latin terms, to convoke, missemblac, yes, to convoke, which is the same thing, calling together, basically. When you have convocation here. Okay, you call people together and you give them their degrees and whatnot to celebrate that. So that's what the church is. That's the community of Christians, the word that's used. Now, Jesus had followers. Jesus certainly had his followers. And there's there are concentric, and here you see in this picture I made, there are concentric circles showing the closeness or the attachment of followers to Jesus. On the very outside, you have people that, hello, Mr. Chapman, which are just generally called the crowd. The crowds that followed around after Jesus, came out to see Jesus, and maybe didn't have much of any real connection to him. But they wanted, Jesus was a celebrity. So they wanted to, if they heard about him, they wanted to see him. So you had the crowd surrounding Jesus. Then getting closer to Jesus, you had his actual disciples, those who had committed themselves to their belief in their belief in Jesus and followed his teachings. Maybe they didn't physically follow him around. Maybe they stayed put. They still lived where they lived. But they believed in Jesus and followed his teaching. He was their teacher, their master. So you had Jesus' disciples, which comes from the Latin word disco discere, which simply means to learn, a learner. Okay? So a disciple is a follower, yes, in general terms, but literally it's someone who is a learner, a student, if you will. Closer to Jesus is a special group called the 12, or the 12 apostles, who were specifically chosen by Jesus.
That's more interesting.
It's like a bagel with mustard on it.
Spicy.
Oh yeah, like spicy mustard. Oh, I like spicy mustard too. I mean, it's got a little bite to it, right? It's very nice. So they're in a different place in a way because, well, not in a way, they are in a different place because where you've got the crowds who are just choosing to, like mill about and follow Jesus. Hey, Jesus is in town. Let's go see what he's doing, Maybe they'll heal another leper or something. But then you have the disciples who are committed to Jesus, but he didn't necessarily choose any of them. They just decided to follow him. So the 12 are in a special position because Jesus himself chooses these 12 men out of the disciples who have committed themselves. And then getting even closer to Jesus, there are 3 people. Peter, a man named Simon, also called Peter. 2 brothers called James and John, all right, who are especially close out of those 12 for whatever reason. I don't know why. But when you read the Gospels, if you read Mark and stuff like that, Jesus usually does things with them that he doesn't really allow or do with the other 9 apostles. Some of you have been reading your papers, and some of you have already mentioned that, like Jesus heals the little girl, Jairus' daughter, and he only allows Peter, James, and John to witness. Okay, why them? I don't know. Okay. But they're in a closer relationship than even the other 12, if you said 9, I know, literally, if you do the math. And even within those 3, you have Simon Peter is the closest to Jesus himself in the center here, this man Simon Peter. Okay, he's very close to Jesus. I'll talk more about that later. So, Jesus did call people to follow him. Some, like the apostles, he specifically chose them. At times he actually there were times where he did call people to follow him and said, come follow me, be my disciple, be my learner. And some people answered his call. For example, we have stories of Jesus calling Simon Peter, okay, and calling James and John, all right. And that's about it. We have a story calling Matthew the apostle, okay, the tax collector. But after Matthew, that's about it. I don't know. Matthew is the outlier here. But again, see, Peter, James, and John, their stories of being called by Jesus to even be his disciples are remembered. But the other 9 apostles, except for Matthew, it's like, don't worry about them. Some didn't follow Jesus. There's a story where Jesus asks a man to come follow him, and he doesn't. He goes away. He can't follow Jesus because he's rich. He wants his money. He doesn't want to give up his money to the poor. He wants the good life. And some did want to follow Jesus, but Jesus had other plans for them. Okay, so already in your papers, 1 or 2 of you mentioned that Jesus' healings is casting out demons, and there's one guy that Jesus casts out a demon and heals him and casts out the demon, and the guy wants to follow Jesus, but Jesus says, no, your job is to stay here in your community and to proclaim what God has done for you by setting you free from this evil spirit. So Jesus actually says, no, it's not in your best interest to follow around with me. But as I show you in this picture, and as I've already told you, Mr. Musa,
Jesus did have a close band of followers, some of whom he selected to be even in a closer special relationship with him. And these, apparently, he called apostles. Apparently that was Jesus' term. Maybe not his actual term from Greek, because Jesus probably wasn't speaking Greek. He Aramaic, so he used another word. But it's translated into Greek as apostello, or an apostle. Simply an emissary, an ambassador, someone who is sent out on a mission. Sent out. That's what mission is. Mito, mitere, misi, misu. To send. A mission. Okay? An emissary. Ex, mito. Send out. Apo, away from. Stello, send. So to send away, to send out. So they are the sent out disciples of Jesus. Okay? There are two kinds of understanding for what I'll get to that in a minute. Excuse me. Jesus gathered around him. I want to talk about the 12 first. These 12 I've mentioned. Jesus himself decided to gather around him 12 men to stand in this closer relationship with him. And the 12... I'll give you a definition of it later on another PowerPoint slide. The 12 seems to have been, their nickname in a way. They weren't called the 12 apostles. They were just called the 12 a lot of times. That seems to be the ancient designation in the Gospels. For example, Paul refers to the 12, not 12 apostles, just the 12. Okay, so they're a special group. And the number 12 certainly had... a number is just a number. But from the history of Judaism, it had a symbolic value for Jews, Mr. Trost, because there were the 12 tribe clans of the man Jacob Israel. Yes, Jacob Israel has like 2 wives that he has children from, and also some of his slave girls. Yes, Jacob moved around, Ms. Murray. Yes. And from those women, he gained 12 children. From these 12 children, family groups emerged, the tribes, the clans. And that's where the Jewish people come from. The Jewish people are not a unified ethnicity. They are a bunch of family groups united. Right? So the 12, like Jesus is restoring in a way the 12 tribes of Israel. Remember the kingdom of God. He's restoring the unified kingdom of God, which contained all the 12 tribes, the 12 family groups. So there was symbolic value in that number 12. For an apostle, Mr. Bean. I'm fine, sir. The apostle can be understood in a broad sense and in a specific sense, right? Since right now, or up till now, I've been talking in it. Is that like orange juice? Or orange drink? Or ooh, mango green tea. Ooh, that's nice. Mango lassi is Indian food. Oh yes, I know mango. Very nice. Very refreshing. Anywho, I've been talking in the specific sense of these 12 men, the apostles. But apostle, we also know had a broader meaning than just the specific sense. So in the broad sense, someone who was sent out, an apostle, was anyone, man or woman, who could be sent out or was sent out into the world to preach the message about Jesus, especially to be a witness to the resurrection, to proclaim the resurrection. Okay? So we have people who are called apostles who are actually not specifically chosen by Jesus or given the name of apostle by Jesus, but later they're recognized as apostles in this broad sense. So I've mentioned Paul of Tarsus, St. Paul of Tarsus, who is, I say, the most famous non-apostle apostle, Mr. Fiorentino, if you know what I'm saying. Another guy called St. Barnabas, who was a companion of Paul, actually led Paul into the faith, and then he kind of recedes into history. But St. Barnabas is called an apostle. And St. Mary Magdalene, she's actually not specifically called an apostle anywhere in the New Testament, but in Christian tradition she is. She is called the apostle to the apostles because she's the first, according to the accounts, to see the risen Christ. He appears to her first. And she brings the message with other ladies, but they're unnamed. She brings the message to the other apostles who are hiding, okay? And they don't believe her. But she has faith in it. She saw it, and she has faith that Jesus rose from the dead. So she's the one who announces to the apostles themselves that Jesus is risen. Christ is risen from the dead, trampling death by death, and to those in the tombs granting life. She is the apostle to the apostles. So she's a very major saint for the early church. Let's turn your page, Dr. Dunn. So that's apostle in the broad sense. What is it in the specific or the limited sense? I didn't update my notes. Okay, well, that's fine. The limited or restricted understanding of an apostle. That's what I've been talking about mostly. The 12 men chosen by Jesus to share in his earthly ministry and to act as witnesses to his resurrection. That's a big one. And after his ministry, to continue on his ministry. So we see, for example, if you read Mark's gospel, the word apostle is applied in this specific sense to this innermost circle of the 12 already in Mark's gospel. So if you look in chapter 3 of Mark's gospel, God bless you. I always wonder about the etiquette of that. Like if someone sneezes and only one person says, God bless you, am I obligated to say, God bless you too? Ethically, should I, be... Or what if two people say, God bless you? Do I have to then be the third? I mean, what's the cutoff? I'm just wondering, what's the ethical cutoff for saying God bless you if somebody sneezes? All right. You still with me, Ms. Tumulty, or still with me? Or you're still coming to class? God bless you. Some days I'm not so sure. I'm even going to get in the car. Mark chapter 3, which do I go to that later? Let me just see here. I'm going to check my PowerPoint. Yeah, I'm going to get to it later, so I guess I'll do it now, because I will talk about it again later, but we might as well. So if you want to look at Mark chapter 3, we'll get to that in a moment. So Mark chapter 3, it said, just to give you the quotes here, Jesus appointed 12, whom he also named apostles. Okay, so the name apostle is attributed directly to Jesus. He called them that. Matthew, in similar passage, chapter 10, says the name of the 12 apostles are these. He uses the longer traditional, the 12 apostles. Yes, apostles. In Luke, the apostles and the 12 are the 12. He uses that. And John always refers to the 12. John, as I said, is an artist. And, part of, like artists, I think, love, that's maybe part of the artistic personality. They love tradition. They love to give, Easter eggs, you know what I'm saying? They like to refer back to things that they've read or other pictures they've seen or music they've heard. And so all those references and incorporate it into their work, And so he prefers the old term, probably the original nickname of the group, which is just the 12, okay, in John. And Luke is interesting because he applies the title exclusively to the 12. There are 12 apostles. And Matthew goes even further. If you read the Gospel of Matthew, you might notice that there are no disciples of Jesus except the 12. The 12 represent all the followers of Jesus. They're the representation of the church. So if you read Matthew's gospel, you'd almost think that Jesus had no other disciples other than these 12 men. But we know from reading the other gospels that, yeah, he had a broader group of people following him around, not just the 12. But Matthew's trying to make a point here about the importance of the apostles, their importance in the community and for the church. So he always, when he copies Mark, he kind of changes it in that way. So he cuts out references to other disciples, and it's always the 12 apostles, as if Jesus had none. And for Luke, he always applies the word apostle to the 12 only. He doesn't use it in the broader sense, even though Paul was an apostle, and he knew Paul apparently. So that restricts. Guess I didn't put that on there. That's weird. Oh, there it is. Okay. So let's look at chapter 3 for a moment. The Gospel of Mark, chapter 3, and we want to look at verse 13. Does anyone want to read that beginning with verse 13 in the Gospel of Mark? Anybody? Mr. Robles, you got it? I see a book open. Yeah. That's where your I'm sorry to interrupt you. That's where verse 13 starts?
Oh,
sorry. Go read 13 first, please.
and he went up on the mountain and called to those he desired, and he appointed 12, he also gave them apostle, so that they might be with him, and he might send them out to preach.
Yeah, keep going.
And have authority to cast out demons. He appointed the 12, Simon, whom he gave to Peter, James the son of Zebedee, and John the brother of James, whom he gave the name Boanerges. That is the son of Thunder. Andrew and Philip and Bartholomew, and Matthew and Thomas and James son of Alphaeus.
Yeah.
And Thaddeus and Simon.
That's interesting.
And Judas Iscariot. Okay.
Which translation are you using? Say? Oh, okay, yeah, I got that too. Yeah, the Catholic edition. It is. Over to the dark side is yeah, the English Standard Version. That's a good version. But that I didn't like that translation of Simon. So, and I'll tell you why. Okay, so Jesus, and this is Mark's Gospel. Jesus goes up a mountain. When does Jesus also go up a mountain? What's another occasion on which Jesus goes up a mountain? Yeah, go ahead, Missy.
When Moses gives them the Ten Commandments.
When Moses does that, yes, he goes up on a mountain, right? But what about Jesus? You're on the right track, Missy. You're on the right track. What do you think? Okay, all right, well, that's fine. Hey, Socrates said that's the beginning of knowledge. Know that you don't know. That's fine. Anybody? When does Jesus go up a mountain? Yes, she's on the right track with Moses. Moses goes up to the mountain, or goes up the mountain and gets the law from God. Jesus also goes up a mountain as king. When does he do that? You're not sure. Yes. Or Miss Kinney, did he go on just stand on a plane? Does that help you out? No. I get paid tomorrow, Mr. Useless. Ms. Murray. That's true. Yes, Jesus does go out up a mountain to pray and to teach. When does he teach on a mountain? Okay. It's an important, I'll give you another hint. It's an important episode in the Gospel of Matthew. Important. Mr. Curantino, I got you.
5,000.
Oh, that's interesting. I'm not sure if that's on a mountain though, but that's, yes, the feeding of 5,000. Or was it 4,000? Was the feeding? 6,000. Oh, Mr. Fiorentino, have you read the Gospel of Mark? You have? Yeah. Okay. Mr. B, the Sermon on the Mount. The Sermon on the Mount, chapters 5 to 7. Jesus goes up the side of a mountain, or on top of a mountain, and he gives a sermon. He gives a talk. So there's symbolism going on. Jesus goes, now he might have also gone up onto a mountain as well. But even if Jesus physically did take the 12 and trek them up a mountain, there's symbolism there as well. Okay, there's actual symbolism in the action. Because again, it harkens back, as Jews, in their mind, it would harken back, I would think, to Moses ascending the mountain. And also in the story of Mount Sinai, Moses is told to bring up some of the priests and the Levites, the leaders of the group, to come up the mountain. Maybe. God seems to change his mind. And at one point he says, no one can come up the mountain except Moses. And then he says, oh, Moses, I want you to bring up the priests and Levites. And Moses has to remind God, Mr. Bean, that God said no one can come up or they die, just me. Oh, yeah. God said. And he says, okay, that's okay. Let them come up. I won't kill them. See the spaceship. So the mountain, Jesus goes up a mountain. He calls those whom he wanted. So Mark is specific about that. This is not just some thing that kind of happened, a bunch of groupies that formed around Jesus. No, he wanted them, and they came to him. And he appointed, he chose them, and he named them. He also named them apostles. He gave them this name. Why? Mark gives us a little bit of information about even why, what Jesus conceived of their role to be. That they might be with him. They were with him before, they were disciples, but I think with him in a closer relationship than just a simple disciple following him around, someone in the crowd. But they would be with him. He might send them forth to preach. Okay, so they're going to go out and preach his message. He's, passing his message to them, and they go out. Jesus can't be everywhere. And to have authority to drive out demons. So that's interesting. Not heal, but demons. That's the focus here for Mark. I think Matthew adds healing and stuff like that. But anyways, the focus is to cast out demons, to fight against the evil spirits that have with Jesus. And again, Mark repeats, he appointed the 12. So he reminds us again, he appointed the 12. And then he gives us the names. This list, this tells us something about Jesus. About his personality. There aren't a lot of details about what kind of man Jesus was, what he looked like, or his likes or dislikes. But one thing you get through the Gospels, that I get at least, Jesus liked to give nicknames. That is apparent in the Gospels, because he gives the nickname of Sons of Thunder to the brothers James and John. He calls Simon Peter, the Rock. That's a nickname. He calls the whole group the 12. So that's a name he makes up. So he seemed to like to do that. The one correction I would make, Mr. Robles, to the translation you used is Simon the Zealot. That's not what it says in the Greek. It says Simon the Canaanian. Okay, and I'll talk about him later when I talk about the 12 apostles and who they are, or maybe I won't. Yeah, I guess I will. We'll see what happens. But he's actually called Simon the Canaanian, and I'll come back to that later, so you don't need to necessarily, worry about it right now. It probably means zealot as well, but we're not totally sure. But Canaanian, he uses a different. And Luke's enumeration of the apostles, Luke translates it as zealot, and that's what they're following there in the ESV. Okay. Whereas one cannot underestimate Christ's resurrection in understanding the Christian faith, we also cannot underestimate the position and the authority of these 12 men that he chose, the 12 apostles, because they stood in a unique position amongst his followers and were treated as such by Christ. Okay, so for example, he specifically chose them. Okay, don't need to be a dead horse. I've shown you this already. Okay, so I'll move on to the second point. They were given special teaching. Okay, obviously, if they're going to go out and preach, they're not preaching their own message. They're his disciples, so they're preaching his message. So he has to not just give them teaching, but explain it. And he does. We see this like in the Gospel of Mark. Some people have mentioned the parable of the sower, which the disciples didn't understand. So later on, when they were at home, together, the apostles asked Jesus, what did you mean by that parable? And he explains it for them. He tells what all the imagery in the parable means, the symbols mean. Okay? So he does that. I think I've already read from John chapters 14 and 17 when we talked about magisterium. Jesus at the Last Supper, the last meal together, he knows he's going to be killed, but, and he will come back, but he's not going to stay forever. That's apparently not his objective. Eventually he'll come back and stay with us forever, but that's not his original objective. And he promises to send the Spirit of truth. He starts talking about this thing called an advocate, a paraclete, a lawyer in a way, okay, who's going to represent you and will remind you and advise you about the things that I taught you, so you'll remember them, and hopefully remember them accurately, because it's the Spirit of truth. It's the truthful Spirit. So you can teach the message after I'm gone. They're also given special powers. We just read in Mark's Gospel, Jesus gives them the power to cast out demons, to do what he's been doing. Okay. So I put this on the PowerPoint. The three roles that Jesus gives to them: to be with him, to preach, and to have authority, exousia. He gives them authority. Another translation is power. Okay, so interesting, because that says something about Jesus. You want to ask the question, who is this Jesus? Jesus has power that he can give. He has supernatural power. He has power himself over supernatural entities like demons, which he can give to others. Notice he doesn't say, in the name of God, I give this to you. On behalf of God, like I'm an agent of God, so I give this to you. No, he gives it. He doesn't rely on God at all. He does it. So Jesus has supernatural power, which can be kind of like Mark hinting at the fact that, who is this? He's more than a man in some ways. Okay? And here we go. Matthew, when he gives the list of the apostles, he expands on this, actually. He includes all the things that Jesus are doing, not just casting out demons and preaching, but curing the sick, healings, physical healings, raising dead people back to life, cleansing lepers, which is also kind of a healing thing, but for some reason they distinguish it. Cleansing lepers, people who have skin diseases, maybe because, being sick or disabled didn't, cut you off from the community. But having a skin disease did, because people were scared. It was like COVID. People were scared to death of contracting them from you. And they had no cure for it, obviously, back then. They had treatments, but they had no cure. So they were scared to death. So if anyone had any sort of skin disease, could be leprosy, the actual disease of leprosy, but it could be eczema or something like that. They didn't have like Ubrelvy or whatever these medications. You see all these commercials for these medications for people. I never knew how many people had skin diseases and stuff like that, but, eczema and all this bad stuff, psoriasis. But anyways, they didn't have that. They didn't have the one with it. No, that's another commercial. Okay, that's a diabetes commercial. That I'm thinking of. Thinking of its song. I have type 2 diabetes, but I manage it well. I take it. Anyway, but that cut you off from the community. You could not live in the town. You had to live outside the town. You had to wear a mask. You had to grow a beard, but a beard couldn't be combed. It had to be muffled, and you had to wear a bell. And you had to, when you were walking any place there were other people, you had to say, unclean, unclean. You had to cry out unclean to let them know you were coming so they could all scurry away, get away from you. You could not enter the temple or a synagogue, so you were even cut off from God. You couldn't go to the temple or the synagogue to pray or offer sacrifice. So that's a big one. And then driving out demons in the Gospel of Matthew. Okay? So he expands on what Mark says, and there's a reason for this, because I think Matthew wants to show that Jesus is giving them the power to do everything he's been doing. Which is quite interesting, because it shows that Jesus, or God, through Jesus, is not jealous in that sense. He's not selfish. He's not like, this is all mine, and you can't have it, you know? Or, I'm Jesus. You know, I'm the power center of the group. I'm the alpha. I'm the big dog. Okay, you come to me. If you want a healing, you come to me. Cast out a demon, you come to me. Clear a leper, come to me. Nobody else. I'm the same. Jesus isn't like that. Jesus freely shares the powers he's doing, even raising dead people. Jesus even has control over who lives and dies, which no man should really has no control over. Only God has control over that. Again, who is this man? Mark wants you to ask this question. Who is he? Because he doesn't seem like he's just a man. But Jesus, nevertheless, even raising the dead, he shares that power with human beings. He's not selfish about it, nor is God. Okay, that's how the Catholic Church, the Catholic Church has all sorts of ways that we participate in the work of Christ and the work of God. Okay, God is not stingy. He allows. So how can men forgive sins? Only God can forgive sins. Oh, if God gives them the power and they participate in that, yeah, you can do that, you know. They can celebrate the Last Supper just like Jesus did and offer his flesh and blood just like Jesus did. Okay? Jesus shares his power. But most especially, the apostles were witnesses to the resurrected Christ. So Jesus wanted witnesses. It wasn't enough, because the apostles could have just written their gospels and said at the end, like Jesus was glorified, and we believe Jesus was glorified. He was a good man, he was taken up into heaven, he now sits at the right hand of God on a throne, and Mr. Bean, who would know I got you, Mr. Bean, God bless you. Who would know any better, Ms. Jones? Would you know what I know? Until we got to the afterlife, then we might know, if we see Jesus sitting on a throne. But they could have simply made that faith statement. This is yes, we know how Jesus died, but God glorified him. He's now in heaven. We believe. You don't need a resurrection to still have the religion. You don't have to come up with this extraordinary idea that, no, the actual fleshly body reanimated and came back to life and forever. Jesus wanted witnesses. He wanted people. He knows we're scientific people. Even back then, you want proof. You don't want just, okay, yeah, Peter, you told me you saw Jesus. What could that be? Could be a ghost, could be a hallucination, whatever. He wanted witnesses, and the apostles were it. Okay? Moving on. Who were they? I thought I'd go over their names just because I think it's interesting. Okay? It's tumulty. Et tu. Hold on a second, I forgot. Kayla. Et tu. Kayla. Et tu. Anyone? Did you have to read Julius Caesar, Shakespeare's Julius Caesar in high school or here at college? Anybody? Anybody? No? No? Nobody? Did you read Harry Potter? You and me, Mr. C. Or Doris. We'll see. We'll see. Who knows? See how the poll comes out, Mr. Means. Who were they? The 12. Here's your definition of the 12. The 12 men chosen by Jesus to be his closest followers and associates in his ministry. And we have four separate lists of names in Matthew chapter 10, Mark chapter 3, and Luke gives the list to us twice in his gospel and in his Acts of the Apostles. What about John's gospel? No, we don't. He mentions names of the apostles, several of them, but he never gives a list. He never gives a list of them. But he does mention some of their names, and there's some overlap with the names that we know from the other lists. So what can we say? First is Simon, a man named Simon or Shimon. Again, not an unusual Jewish name. Simon. Whoops. There we go. I'm following St. Mark's list here because it's the more, it's the original one, and that's what Mark and Luke were probably copying with their own knowledge. But they make changes and indicate something about what they thought about the apostles. Shimon, whom Mark tells us was also called Peter. I'll talk about more with the papacy. I'll get more into Peter when I talk about the papacy, the Bishop of Rome, because Simon Peter is a major component of that belief about the importance of the Bishop of Rome. But nevertheless, needless to say, he was given the nickname Peter, which was very rare. We have not found any reference to anyone in the ancient world with this name, this word, which means rock. Literally, Petros in Greek means a stone or a rock. No one was called that, apparently. If anyone was called it, it was extremely a rare nickname or type of name. Peter seems to be the first, and it seems to be from Jesus of Nazareth. He was a fisherman, and he was the brother of Andrew, one of the other apostles, Andrew. They were brothers, which I don't think you know from Mark's gospel. He doesn't identify Andrew as a brother. I think Matthew identifies him as the brother of Peter. Or no, Luke, I think, identifies him as the brother of Peter, but Mark does not. Doesn't connect him with Peter at all. And Simon seems to have had a leadership role. He was not the first call. He was not the first disciple to be called, apparently, but his name comes first in every list of the apostles, of the 12. And he's the spokesman for the 12. More often than not, when he's the one who pipes up and asks Jesus a question, or asks what all the other apostles are wondering. Okay, so he's the spokesman for the apostles, and he's the first in all the Gospels. Not in John's Gospel. Well, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. He is the first one and the only apostle, actually, who believes and is willing to confess that Jesus is the Messiah, the Christ of the Jews. Jesus asks them, during one scene, he says, okay, what do the crowds think about me? He takes a little poll amongst them. They think you're a prophet. They think, maybe you're John the Baptist, risen back from the dead, come back from the dead. But Jesus then says to them, well, what do you think? And there's like silence. There's like nothing. It's like, And out of all those 12 men, only Simon has the courage to say, I think you are the Christ. I think you are the Messiah. For which he is blessed by Jesus. And that's apparently the moment, according to Matthew's gospel, only Matthew mentions it. According to Matthew's gospel, that's the moment where Jesus changes his name and says, now you're going to be called Peter. And that's how he's... so his name changes. So he's no longer referred to a lot of times as Simon. Like Paul always refers to him as Peter, as the rock. That's the name Paul knows him by, even though his original name is Simon. So he makes that name change. He's not just Simon, he's Simon the Rock, or Rocky. Which sounds kind of weird, so I don't usually use that. But really, if we took it literally into our language, Rocky is the nickname we'd use. He starts calling him Rocky. He's the rock. The rock of what? Well, the rock of the church. He's the rock of his faith. His statement of faith that he was willing to say categorically Jesus was the Messiah when others maybe weren't. Don't worry about the Petrine trajectory. I'm not going to go into that. We'll talk more about Peter's authority when we talk about the early church and the Bishop of Rome. Then we have the two sons, James and John, who are the sons of Zebedee. whoever that was, their father. And both of them were fishermen as well, and they were brothers. James, the son of Zebedee, is the first martyr amongst the apostles. He's the first one to be killed for his faith in Jesus, his belief in Jesus. And that's mentioned in Acts chapter 12. Did I put it here? Yes. Acts chapter 12, under another one of Herod's children, Herod Agrippa, who reigned in 41 and 44. So that's when he was killed. He was killed in the 40s. Okay. Yeah, he's King Herod's grandson. I talked about King Herod before. He was one of his grandchildren. But we don't need to say anything more than that. And yes, they, according to Mark, only Mark, they were given this name Boanerges, which is a nickname, but we don't really know where it comes from, actually. Some scholars think that it actually is a Greek corruption of an Aramaic statement, Bane something, which means sons of, but which might have been corrupted to Boanerges, okay? Because this doesn't mean anything in Greek. This is nothing. But Mark tells us it means sons of thunder. So whatever, okay? It means sons of thunder. Why did Jesus call them that? I don't know. I don't know why. Some people try to extrapolate from, well, they have fiery disposition, because at one point they tell Jesus to call down fire upon his enemies, and they don't want other people who are not part of their group to be preaching about Jesus or casting out demons in the name of Jesus, and blah, blah. So maybe they have a fiery temperament. They're extremist in that way. So Jesus called, don't know. Jesus knows. Okay. And James and John possibly know. Probably know, but I don't know. Then we have Peter, James, and John, yes. Then we have the others. This is a painting from the Catacomb Domitilla in Rome, dates from the 300s AD. It's a Christian cemetery. A catacomb is an underground cemetery, as I believe I told you before. So here you see the niche or the space in the wall where they would place the body. And Christians drew pictures. I mean, Christians were drawing pictures very early on, of biblical scenes, of saints like Peter and Paul, Blessed Mother, Mother of Christ, stuff like that. And here's a scene of, I guess it could be the Last Supper, or at least it's Jesus with his disciples, actually. Jesus is sitting here in the middle, seated on a chair. Okay, so that's probably him and not one of the apostles. Notice how he looks, right? What's interesting about him, Mr. Mole? And what else? He has his arms up. Okay. Maybe in blessing, we don't know. What else about his face, though? Other than the fact that he's white and he's a Palestinian Jew, probably more olive color. Huh? He's looking to his right, but think about pictures of Jesus. You're right about the short hair. Usually Jesus has like the heavy metal hair, the 80s hair, long. Huh? Yeah, he's shaved. He has no beard, like he's a young man. Okay. So it's a different portrait of Jesus. These are early days, different portraits of Jesus. It's from the 300s. Okay. So and he doesn't look like a Palestinian Jew would probably dress. He's dressed more like a Roman, in his toga, and kind of like a philosopher or something like that. And these are apparently his disciples. Now, does anyone see a problem with this picture with Jesus and the disciples? Anyone notice an issue? An oversight by the painter of this picture. Yeah. Huh? They look like children? Okay, yeah, they could. Yeah. I disagree with that. But then Jesus says that you will God is made for children, so maybe there's symbolic value. Mr. Beaton. There's only 10 seconds. Yeah. Or 9. Yeah, let's count them. Let's count them. Got a head here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Is there something here? There's something here, but it doesn't look like a head. So let's say 10. So the 12 apostles, there aren't 12. So what happened? Did the artist run out of space? Maybe, it can happen. You start doing, it's like when you're tiling a floor or something, you're doing reno in your house and you forget, and you start tiling the floor and then you get back and, whoa, wait a second. I'm up against the wall. How do I get out now? Without messing up the ground or messing up or the paint if you're painting, it's like, what do I do? So maybe that's what happened. I'm spitballing, I don't know, that the person thought he had more space than he really had and he could only fit in that many. But apparently it's a picture of Jesus and his apostles. So Andrew I told you about, he's Peter's brother. He was a follower of John the Baptist before Jesus. And he actually introduces Peter to Jesus. Philip, don't know much of anything about him other than the fact that he's got a Greek name. Philippos is not a Jewish name. It's from Greek. He might have still been a Jew, but who knows? A lot of Jews had Greek names. But that's all we know. It's a Greek name. Bartholomew, again, all we know about him is his name. He was an apostle of Jesus, and he had a name. His name comes from Aramaic. It means the son of Ptolemy, or Talmai. Whoops, where are we here? Bar, which means son, which we know from Aramaic. Bar Anash, son of man. So Bar Ptolemy, or Talmai. So we know who his father was, or one of his ancestors. Okay, he might be this other person called Nathaniel. In the Gospel of John, there's a mentioning of a Nathaniel as an apostle. But and historically, Christians have connected the two. Say, oh, he must have been Bartholomew. Well, who knows? We don't know. Could be two different people. Matthew, again, is identified as a tax collector in the Gospel of Matthew, so he worked for the Romans. He might have been an extortionist because, tax collectors, the way they collected taxes was you bought the contract from the Romans, you paid money for the contract to collect the taxes, and then you collected the taxes, but you didn't get any cut of that. There was no benefit to you. Your job was to collect the taxes, and the gods help you if you didn't give them precisely what they were expecting. So how did you make any money on it? How did you make a living off of it? Well, you charged people a little bit more than the taxes so that you're making some money too. So they were like extortionists, and people hated them for that. And they also collaborated with the Romans, so they hated them for that too. So Matthew, the tax collector. However, Mark calls him Levi, who may be the same person. We don't know. Mark mentions Levi, who could be Matthew. But they might be two different people. Then there's Thomas. We know his name is Aramaic, and it means a twin. Thomas means twin. So Jesus had a twin, apparently, amongst his apostles. So there was another Thomas walking around who looked exactly like him, Or he was a twin of Jesus. I told you, when some of the crazy... Oh, maybe I didn't tell you this, but some of the... we talked about the canon, and you had stories like the Acts of Thomas, which were written by some pious Christian because they wanted to know what happened to the apostles afterwards, and no one knew, just like with Jesus. So people wrote stories. Even Christians wrote stories. Other people wrote stories. Someone wrote a story about Thomas, and playing off his name as being a twin, the person made him a twin of Jesus. Now, how does that work if Mary, according to the Gospels, only gave birth to Jesus? She didn't give birth to twins. It's like the person doesn't know how it works. So Thomas looked in the Acts of Thomas, Thomas looked exactly like Jesus. And the person who wrote the story plays off of that and has all sorts of fun with, it's kind of like a comedy of errors. People think, Jesus appears on the scene and they think it's Thomas. And then another story, it's Thomas, but they think it's Jesus. And all... Not in your Bibles, is it? There are reasons why the church said, no, we don't think so. We don't think that's inspired scripture. But he was a twin, apparently. Otherwise, why give him the name? James, the son of Alphaeus or Alphaeus, that's all we know. He's Alphaeus, apparently his father. Or he might be Judas, excuse me. Then we have Thaddeus. Thaddeus, all we have is a name, know nothing more about him. But in other lists, there is a Judas, son of James, who's mentioned, and some people link these two and say they're one and the same as well, but they could be two different people. So today in like Catholic churches, you'll see statues to St. Jude Thaddeus, St. Jude, praying to, this is the Jude they're referring to when they talk about, pray to the saint of impossible causes, if you really need a miracle or something, you pray to St. Jude. This is the guy they're talking about, Jude Thaddeus. But it could be two different people. We don't know. Then we have Simon the Zealot. Now he's called Simon the Canaanian in the ESV and Mark, which they should not do that. But because Kanana in Aramaic can mean as someone who's zealous. So Mark preserves in the Greek the original Aramaic term, interestingly enough. Whereas the other apostles translate it for the readers who might not be from Palestine and know Aramaic. So Luke calls him a zealot. Okay, what were zealots? Well, zealots were terrorists. Okay, that's what they were. The zealots were a party of Jews who wanted to overthrow the Romans. They wanted to establish the kingdom too, the kingdom of God, but they were going to do it through military means. So, they would, kill Roman soldiers and do just stuff like that and stir up chaos. So, was Simon, this man Simon, really a zealot, or is he just being called a zealot because he was really zealous? We don't know, but it's interesting that he's given that title because he may have come from this terrorist group, so a rather dodgy background for him. And then finally we have Judas Iscariot, which we know a bunch of things about. We know he betrayed Jesus. For some reason, he handed Jesus over to Jesus' enemies. He lost faith in Jesus for some reason. Don't know why. The Gospels never explain why. We don't know what Iscariot means. It could be the man from Kerioth, Ishkarioth. Some people have said Kerioth, which was a town in Judea. Ish means man in Hebrew, and Kerioth is the name of this town in southern Judea. So some scholars say, well, it's telling where he's from, like Jesus of Nazareth, Jesus Nazarene. This is Judas from Kerioth. Maybe that's where he's from. The Gospel of John tells us that he held the purse for the group. He held the money for the group that people would give them and that they would use to feed themselves, to do whatever in their travels, help the poor and stuff like that, pay the temple tax. But he stole from it. He took a little bit off the top for himself. So he was a thief. And apparently the group knew it, because John tells us in his gospel openly that he was a thief. He stole from the money. And yet Jesus never kicked him out of the apostles, interestingly enough. And as I said, he's the one who betrays Jesus to his enemies. He brings the guards. He himself leads the guards to the Garden of Gethsemane where Jesus is, so we can identify specifically Jesus, who they're supposed to take. And apparently, we don't know what happens to him later. I mean, he does die eventually, but Matthew says he killed himself, and Luke says that he just died mysteriously. So we have two different stories about what happened to him ultimately. So just don't know. This is memory. So, we're dealing with memory. And in some of these cases, like Bartholomew or Thaddeus or Judas, the son of James, whatever, we just have memories that have gotten a little bit murky over time. They kind of remember the names of who the apostles were, but they don't remember them all exactly. Could they have different names? Sure. Bartholomew could have also been known as Nathaniel. Thaddeus could have also been known as Judas. That's fine. But we have no proof to necessarily link those names together as the same person. Okay? So whatever. Most of the names they're agreed on, but some aren't. Some aren't. That's just the way it is. People's memories get hazy. Even about the apostles, who they were specifically. Because they weren't as important as the message of Jesus. They were the bringers of the message of Jesus, but it wasn't necessarily important that we kept every list and every name of every apostle. The church I already talked about. I gave you a definition of that, so I don't need to do that. The church. Jesus uses, and I'm talking, just so you know, I'm talking about the apostles because the apostles are the foundation of the church. They're the foundation. Is Jesus the foundation? Yes, but Jesus is called the cornerstone. He's like the main stone on which the rest of the foundation and structure is attached. Okay, so again, it's never just Jesus alone, okay? He's with his community. You can't understand Jesus apart from the church, apart from his community of followers. And so the word church is only used twice by Jesus and might not have actually been used by him. It might be a term that was placed on his lips by the gospel writer, because it only occurs in Matthew's gospel where Jesus uses this term ecclesia. And he uses it, in chapter 16, 18, and he uses it again in another reference in chapter 18. He uses this word ecclesia. But that's it. He doesn't use it in Mark. He doesn't use it in Luke. He doesn't use it, nowhere else is it used by Jesus. It doesn't mean Jesus never used an equivalent term to describe his community. He could have. I wasn't there. But it also is possible that Matthew is interpreting what he's talking about and using this later term that came to be used by Christians for their community, which came from Judaism. Again, the Christians took this word ecclesia from Judaism because they were Jews. How do we know this? Well, because when the Septuagint translated the Hebrew texts, when they refer to the assembly of Israel, the Kahal Yisrael, this word Kahal in Hebrew, all throughout, when Moses is at Mount Sinai, the Jews are described as, the 12 tribes are described as the Kahal Yisrael, the assembly of all Israel gathered before God. Okay, so this is frequently throughout the Hebrew scriptures. All right. When they translated the Septuagint that we talked about, they had to look for a term to translate what Kahal meant, and they chose ecclesia. So literally, you could call it the Church of Israel. If you want to be absolutely literal to the Greek, or, you didn't make a church, still translated assembly would be literal. But you could also translate it the Church of Israel. And Christians saw that. They saw that almost like as a prophecy, in a way. How even the Septuagint translated the word Kahal, kind of like a prophecy of the coming of the church, of Jesus as well, who founds the church, who creates the church. So they just took it over from their Jewish heritage, okay, and called themselves the ecclesia. They weren't superseding Israel, because of course Israel doesn't end. Even after Christianity, you still have Jews who are following Judaism. I don't believe in Jesus. But also, it would be kind of silly to say that, Christianity supersedes Judaism and Judaism kind of goes away or gets rid of it because it's all based on it. You've just knocked out your legs. You've cut yourself off at the knees. You're standing on, Christianity stands on Judaism. Okay. So no, it's a succeeding of Judaism. Succession is not supersession. It's not superseding it, going beyond it. Like, you don't need this anymore, because you do. But you're succeeding it. You're fulfilling it. So they saw the church as the fulfillment of the Kahal Yisrael, the fulfillment of the whole assembly of Israel. Fulfilled, why? Because the Messiah of Israel has come in their belief. So they now they have the crown of the Messiah. The Kahal has been crowned by their king in a way, because he's come. So it's the fulfillment. It's now the church, the ecclesia. I want to say that. I put that on there, but let's see if 23. Let me just take a peek here. 3, 2. Yeah, I know. It's funny, but I think it's a funny text, but no, I won't do that. Okay. And this word is used frequently in Paul's writings, and just like apostle, actually, I'll skip over this. Sorry about that. I'm kind of cutting and pasting as I go. Some things I don't need to say. I don't want to talk about. Go down a rabbit hole. What did the early church look like? This community that succeeds Israel, continues Israel, yes, because the Messiah of Israel has come, but also succeeds it. So there is a difference here. There is a change because the Messiah has come. Okay. And you have this branching off. You have the Messianist Jews who go off and becomes Christianity, and you have the other Jews who don't accept from Judaism who go off, and so they're like sister religions, okay? And Judaism turns into rabbinical Judaism, it's called. But what did the early church, the early community look like? We want to look at Acts chapter 2. So look there in your Bible, please, chapter 2 of Acts of the Apostles, beginning with verse 42. What on, Mr. Chapman? How's it going? Oh. Ms. Goff, what do you got? Got it, Ms. Goff?
Verse. Okay. They devoted themselves to the teaching of the apostles, into the communal life, to breaking of the bread, and to the prayers. All came upon everyone, and many wonders and signs were done through the apostles.
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, we don't have to worry about that. So this is Luke's portrait of the early church, and you have to remember something with Luke. It's kind of idealized, okay? We know from the writings of Paul that there were already problems amongst the Christian communities. There were disagreements and things like that. Luke is giving kind of like a perfect picture of how things were. Everyone's all kumbaya and in love with each other. And yes, Mr. DeRusso, thank you for keeping me humble, sir. But that probably wasn't, you're dealing with human beings, so I'm going to imagine that it wasn't all peaches and cream. Nevertheless, it is the inspired word of God, and I take it that way, so I want to look at this description. What does he say? The early Christians devoted themselves to what? To Jesus? To Bible reading? You think so? You think so? Who said that? Mr. Bean. Stop answering questions. You're making me look bad. You make me look like I'm teaching you something or you're learning. That's not why you're at university, sir. I'm kidding, of course. I'm just messing with you. Excellent, Mr. Bean. Yeah, to the Now, of course, were they, believing in Jesus? Obviously, okay? I'm kind of setting you up here. Obviously, they're Christians. They're following Jesus. Were they reading the Bible? Yes, we know they had the Old Testament. They had scriptures that they were reading. But that's not what Luke centers in on. It's the teaching of the apostles. They believe about Jesus, and they interpret the scriptures through the teaching of the apostles about Jesus. That's how important these men are. They're didache. Greek word is didache, teaching. Whoop, there we go. The apostles' teaching. The second thing they're committed to is community life. Koinonia, or communion. So the first thing, the didache, they're faithful. The apostles bring a faithful continuity with Jesus' teaching. They're the connection point. And maybe I'll end here because I'm going to go deeper into other things, and I'm not going to try to push myself through it quickly. So I'll end here, and I'll see you next week. Halloween's coming, Mr. Trost. Woo! There might be candy. was tumulty. Maybe Mr. Fiorentini. Da-da-da-dee-da-da-da. Mr. Trost. Queen.